Elena Vasquez stood at the industrial washing machine in the basement of the Grandview Retirement Home, her fingers moving with an unusual precision as she folded towels. To most observers, she was just another minimum wage employee going through the motions of her daily routine. But Dr. Margaret Chen, the facility's new medical director, noticed something different about the way Elena's hands moved. Each fold was executed with surgical precision, her fingers dancing across the fabric in patterns that seemed almost choreographed. What Dr. Chen didn't know was that in less than 12 hours, those same hands would be the only thing standing between 37 elderly residents and a group of armed intruders who had chosen the wrong facility to target. Sometimes the person folding your laundry is the last person you'd expect to save your life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The basement of Grandview Retirement Home carried the perpetual scent of industrial detergent mixed with the faint mustiness that seemed to inhabit every corner of the 70-year-old building. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across rows of commercial washing machines and dryers that had been running continuously since 6 in the morning. The concrete floor, painted institutional green decades ago, showed wear patterns where countless employees had walked the same paths between machines, creating a map of routine that spoke to the mundane nature of the work performed in this forgotten corner of the facility. Elena Vasquez had been working in the laundry department for 8 months, ever since she had arrived in the small town of Millbrook with nothing but a worn duffel bag and a carefully constructed background that would pass casual scrutiny. To her supervisor, Janet Morrison, she was a quiet immigrant woman who spoke adequate English and showed up on time for every shift. To the nursing staff upstairs, she was practically invisible, just another face in the army of service workers who kept the facility running while remaining largely unnoticed by the residents and their families. The retirement home employed 43 people across 3 shifts, from the licensed practical nurses who administered medications to the maintenance crew who fixed broken fixtures and maintained the aging infrastructure. Elena occupied the bottom rung of this hierarchy, earning $12 an hour to process the endless stream of soiled linens, personal clothing, and institutional uniforms that flowed through the laundry department like a textile river that never stopped flowing. Her workstation was positioned near the folding tables where clean items were sorted and prepared for distribution throughout the facility. The work was repetitive and physically demanding, requiring her to stand for 8 hours while lifting heavy baskets and operating machinery that generated significant heat and noise. Most employees lasted less than 6 months in the position before finding work elsewhere or transferring to different departments within the facility. But Elena had reasons for choosing this particular job that had nothing to do with career advancement or financial ambition. The laundry department was isolated from the main activities of the retirement home, providing her with the anonymity she required while offering unrestricted access to every floor of the building through service elevators that most staff members barely noticed. Her position also required her to work alone for large portions of each shift, giving her time to observe and analyze without drawing attention to herself. What made Elena different from her coworkers was not immediately apparent to casual observers. She appeared to be in her early 30s with dark hair that she kept pulled back in a practical ponytail and brown eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing about her thoughts. Her clothing was deliberately unremarkable, consisting of the same type of scrubs and comfortable shoes worn by dozens of other service workers throughout the facility. She spoke with a slight accent that suggested Spanish as her first language, though she never discussed her background or country of origin with anyone. The truth about Elena Vasquez was considerably more complicated than her employment records indicated. Her real name was Elena Restrepo, and she had spent the previous 12 years working for a private military contractor that specialized in executive protection and high-risk extraction operations. Her client list had included Fortune 500 CEOs, foreign diplomats, and government officials who faced credible threats from terrorist organizations, criminal cartels, and state-sponsored assassination teams. Her training had begun in the Colombian military, where she had excelled in close-quarters combat, tactical medicine, and advanced marksmanship before being recruited by an American contractor who recognized her exceptional abilities. Over the course of her career, she had operated in 43 countries across 6 continents, providing security services in environments from corporate boardrooms to active war zones. Elena's expertise extended far beyond traditional security work. She was fluent in 7 languages, held advanced certifications in emergency medical treatment, and possessed intimate knowledge of surveillance systems, explosive devices, and digital communications. Her hand-to-hand combat skills had been honed through thousands of hours of training in multiple martial arts disciplines, while her firearms proficiency had been tested in real-world situations where failure meant death for both herself and her clients. More importantly, Elena understood how to blend into different environments while maintaining constant awareness of potential threats. She could assess the security vulnerabilities of any building within minutes of entering it, identify potential weapons among everyday objects, and plan multiple escape routes that most people would never consider. These skills had kept her alive through incidents that had killed less prepared operators, but they had also extracted a psychological toll that had eventually led her to seek a different kind of life. The decision to leave the private military world had not been made lightly or impulsively. Elena's last assignment had involved protecting a pharmaceutical executive whose company was developing treatments for rare childhood diseases. The executive had received death threats from a radical group that opposed medical testing, but the contract seemed routine compared to some of the high-threat situations Elena had handled in the past. The assignment had gone wrong when the radical group proved to be a front for a much more sophisticated organization with connections to foreign intelligence services. What should have been a simple protection detail had turned into a running battle through the streets of Prague, with Elena fighting a rearguard action while evacuating her client to a secure facility. She had succeeded in keeping the executive alive, but the incident had involved civilian casualties and had required her to make split-second decisions about who lived and who died. The psychological weight of those decisions had accumulated over years of similar incidents, creating a burden that Elena could no longer carry. She had saved countless lives during her career, but she had also been forced to take lives when no other options existed. The moral complexity of her work had begun to affect her sleep, her relationships, and her ability to find meaning in anything beyond the immediate tactical requirements of each mission. Elena's transition out of the private military world had required careful planning and the creation of an entirely new identity. The nature of her previous work meant that she had enemies in multiple countries who would be interested in settling old scores if they discovered her location. She had also accumulated knowledge about classified operations and sensitive political arrangements that made her a potential liability to former clients who preferred that certain information never became public. The identity of Elena Vasquez had been constructed with the help of a former colleague who specialized in creating documentation for operators who needed to disappear from their previous lives. The background included employment history at several service jobs in different states, along with the kind of unremarkable personal details that would satisfy routine background checks without creating memorable impressions. Millbrook had been chosen as her destination because it was large enough to provide anonymity while being small enough that she could monitor potential threats without sophisticated surveillance equipment. The town had a stable economy based on agriculture and light manufacturing, along with a population that included enough immigrants that her presence would not attract unusual attention from local residents. The Grandview Retirement Home had appealed to Elena for several practical reasons beyond the employment opportunity it provided. The facility housed residents who were largely isolated from the outside world, reducing the likelihood that anyone would recognize her from her previous career. The building itself was substantial enough to provide multiple defensive positions and escape routes while being sufficiently isolated from neighboring structures that external threats could be detected before they became immediate dangers. Elena's daily routine at the retirement home had become a carefully orchestrated performance designed to maintain her cover while allowing her to gather intelligence about her environment and the people who inhabited it. She arrived each morning at exactly 7 o'clock, using a different route from her small apartment to avoid establishing patterns that could be exploited by anyone conducting surveillance. Her appearance and demeanor were deliberately unremarkable, calculated to ensure that she would be remembered as a diligent worker but not as someone worth investigating further. The laundry department provided her with an ideal observation post from which to monitor the activities of the retirement home without appearing to conduct surveillance. Her work required her to visit every floor of the building on a regular basis, giving her opportunities to assess security measures, identify potential vulnerabilities, and catalog the daily routines of staff members and residents. She had committed the facility's floor plans to memory within her first week of employment, along with the locations of emergency exits, fire suppression systems, and communication equipment. Elena's co-workers had accepted her presence without curiosity or suspicion, treating her as just another employee who performed her duties competently but kept to herself. Janet Morrison, the laundry supervisor, had initially been concerned about Elena's lack of experience with industrial equipment but had quickly recognized her exceptional attention to detail and willingness to work overtime when needed. The nursing staff occasionally interacted with Elena when collecting clean linens or delivering soiled items to the laundry department, but these exchanges were brief and professional. Elena had deliberately avoided developing personal relationships with her coworkers, understanding that close friendships could lead to questions about her background that would be difficult to answer without creating inconsistencies in her cover story. The residents of Grandview Retirement Home represented a cross-section of the local community, ranging from retired farmers and factory workers to former teachers and small business owners. Most were in their 70s and 80s, with various degrees of physical and cognitive impairment that required different levels of care and assistance. Elena had learned to recognize many of them by sight during her routine deliveries of clean clothing and linens, though she maintained the professional distance expected of service workers. What Elena had not expected when she took the position was the gradual development of genuine concern for the welfare of the residents. Her previous career had required her to maintain emotional detachment from the people she protected, viewing them as assets to be preserved rather than individuals with their own hopes and fears. But the elderly residents of Grandview possessed a dignity and resilience that reminded her of her own grandparents who had survived decades of political violence in Colombia while maintaining their humanity and compassion for others. Mrs. Dorothy Hamilton in room 237 had been a high school principal for 35 years and still possessed a sharp wit that she used to keep the nursing staff on their toes. Frank Kowalski in room 154 was a Korean War veteran who had lost his left leg to a mine but still insisted on walking to the dining room under his own power for every meal. Sarah Chen in room 289 had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s and spoke 4 languages fluently despite suffering from early-stage dementia that sometimes left her confused about where she was. These individuals had become more than just faces in the hallway to Elena. They represented the kind of life she hoped to build for herself, one defined by meaningful relationships and contributions to her community rather than the constant threat of violence that had characterized her previous existence. The retirement home had become a sanctuary where she could begin the process of healing from years of trauma while serving people who deserved protection and care in their final years. Elena's daily routine had evolved into a careful balance between maintaining her cover and gathering the information she needed to assess potential threats to the facility. She had identified several security vulnerabilities that concerned her, including inadequate lighting in the parking areas, outdated locks on ground floor windows, and emergency procedures that had not been updated in years. The facility's security system consisted primarily of cameras at the main entrance and a single guard who worked the overnight shift, measures that would be adequate for deterring casual theft but insufficient for dealing with serious criminal activity. The town of Millbrook itself had a low crime rate, with the local police department handling mostly traffic violations, domestic disputes, and occasional property crimes. The nearest major city was 40 miles away, meaning that response times for specialized law enforcement units would be measured in hours rather than minutes if serious trouble developed. Elena understood that the residents of Grandview would be largely dependent on the facility's own resources if faced with any kind of emergency that exceeded the capabilities of local first responders. Dr. Margaret Chen had joined the Grandview staff 3 months earlier, bringing with her a reputation for innovative approaches to geriatric care and a commitment to improving the quality of life for elderly residents. She had previously worked at larger facilities in urban areas where she had developed protocols for managing complex medical conditions and coordinating care among multiple specialists. Her arrival at Grandview represented a significant upgrade in the medical expertise available to residents, though it had also introduced new dynamics among the staff that Elena monitored carefully. Dr. Chen's observational skills were considerably more advanced than those of her colleagues, a fact that Elena had noticed during their limited interactions.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The doctor seemed to notice details that escaped other staff members, including subtle changes in residents' conditions and patterns of behavior that might indicate developing problems. This heightened awareness made Dr. Chen potentially valuable as an ally, but also potentially dangerous if she began to ask questions about Elena's background that could compromise her carefully constructed cover.
The interaction that had caught Dr. Chen's attention had occurred during Elena's afternoon routine of delivering clean towels to the third-floor rehabilitation unit. Elena had been folding the towels at her workstation when Dr. Chen passed through the area, ostensibly checking on a patient but actually observing Elena's technique with the kind of focused attention that suggested professional interest rather than casual curiosity. Elena's hands moved with a precision that reflected years of training in fine motor control, a skill that was essential for handling weapons, medical equipment, and explosive devices under high-stress conditions. Her fingers maintained perfect spacing and timing as she executed each fold, creating uniform results that exceeded the standards expected for institutional laundry. The movements were economical and purposeful, containing none of the wasted motion that characterized most repetitive manual tasks. More significantly, Elena's hands never paused or fumbled, even when her attention appeared to be focused elsewhere. She could carry on conversations with coworkers while maintaining perfect technique, a level of muscle memory that typically required thousands of hours of practice to develop. Her grip strength and dexterity were also exceptional, allowing her to handle heavy loads and manipulate objects with a control that suggested specialized training in activities that demanded extraordinary hand-eye coordination. Dr. Chen had worked with enough medical residents and surgical technicians to recognize the signs of advanced fine motor training when she saw them. Elena's movements reminded her of the precision she had observed in operating rooms, where surgeons performed complex procedures through motions that had been refined through years of practice. The comparison raised questions about Elena's background that Dr. Chen found increasingly difficult to ignore as she observed similar displays of unusual competence in other aspects of her work. Elena had noticed Dr. Chen's scrutiny but had not yet determined whether it represented a serious threat to her cover. Medical professionals were trained to be observant, and it was possible that the doctor's interest was simply professional curiosity about an employee who seemed overqualified for her position. However, Elena's survival instincts had been honed through experiences where failing to take potential threats seriously had resulted in life-threatening situations for both herself and her clients. The careful balance that Elena had maintained for 8 months was beginning to show signs of strain as her genuine concern for the residents conflicted with her need to remain anonymous and unnoticed. She had chosen the laundry position specifically because it would allow her to blend into the background of the facility's operations, but her protective instincts were making it increasingly difficult to ignore security vulnerabilities that could endanger the people she had come to care about. Elena's apartment in Millbrook was a modest one-bedroom unit in a complex that housed mostly service workers and retirees living on fixed incomes. She had furnished it with items purchased from second-hand stores, creating an environment that appeared consistent with her cover identity while containing hidden modifications that reflected her true capabilities. The bedroom closet concealed a secure storage area where she maintained emergency supplies, communication equipment, and other resources that might be needed if her cover was compromised or if serious threats materialized. Her financial resources were more substantial than her lifestyle suggested, consisting of payments from previous contracts that had been invested conservatively to provide long-term security without creating patterns that could be traced by hostile intelligence services. Elena lived well below her means by necessity, understanding that any deviation from the expected financial profile of a minimum wage worker could attract unwanted attention from law enforcement or other investigators. The psychological adjustment to civilian life had proven more challenging than Elena had anticipated when she made the decision to leave the private military world. Her training had conditioned her to maintain constant vigilance for potential threats, making it difficult to relax even in environments that appeared completely safe. Sleep remained elusive, interrupted by dreams that replayed incidents from her previous career and by an hypervigilance that caused her to wake at the slightest sound. Elena's relationship with the other residents of her apartment complex was limited to polite greetings and brief conversations about weather or local events. She had learned to project an image of friendly but reserved personality that discouraged deeper inquiries while avoiding the kind of antisocial behavior that might make her memorable to neighbors. Her cover story included a fictional divorce and relocation for a fresh start, explanations that most people accepted without requiring detailed elaboration. The small-town environment of Millbrook provided both advantages and challenges for maintaining her anonymity. The advantage was that strangers were relatively rare, making it easier to identify potential threats before they became immediate dangers. The challenge was that her presence as a newcomer had initially attracted attention from residents who were curious about her background and interested in welcoming her to the community. Elena had navigated these social expectations by participating selectively in community activities that were consistent with her cover identity while avoiding situations that might require her to provide detailed information about her past. She attended the local Catholic church occasionally, volunteered for a community cleanup project, and shopped at the same grocery stores and restaurants used by other working-class residents of the town. Dr. Chen's growing interest in Elena's background represented the first serious challenge to the carefully constructed life she had built in Millbrook. The doctor possessed the education and analytical skills necessary to identify inconsistencies in Elena's cover story if she decided to investigate further. More importantly, Dr. Chen had access to personnel records and the authority to ask questions that other staff members might not feel comfortable pursuing. Elena's options for dealing with Dr. Chen's scrutiny were limited by her commitment to avoiding any actions that might harm innocent people or compromise her ability to continue protecting the residents of Grandview. She could not simply disappear without explanation, as such behavior would confirm that she had something to hide and might prompt official investigations that could threaten other former operators who had chosen similar paths. Neither could she intimidate Dr. Chen into dropping her inquiries, as such tactics would be inconsistent with the low-profile approach that had kept her safe for 8 months. The solution, Elena realized, might require her to reveal carefully selected portions of her background to Dr. Chen while maintaining the secrecy of the most sensitive details. Such an approach would be risky, but it might also create an opportunity to gain an ally who possessed resources and authority that could be valuable if serious threats materialized. Dr. Chen's medical training and leadership position within the facility made her potentially useful for coordinating emergency responses and maintaining the safety of residents during crisis situations. Elena's assessment of potential threats to the Grandview facility had identified several scenarios that concerned her based on her understanding of criminal behavior and the vulnerability of elderly populations. Retirement homes were attractive targets for certain types of criminals because they housed residents who often possessed valuable assets while being physically unable to defend themselves effectively. The facilities also typically contained prescription medications that could be sold on illegal markets, along with personal belongings and financial information that could be exploited by identity thieves. More sophisticated threats might come from organized criminal groups that targeted elderly victims for financial fraud or from individuals with grievances against specific residents or staff members. Elena's experience had taught her that the most dangerous situations often developed from seemingly minor incidents that escalated beyond the capabilities of local law enforcement to handle effectively. The isolation of Millbrook from major urban areas created additional vulnerabilities that Elena had noted during her assessment of the local security environment. Emergency services were limited in both personnel and equipment, while the nearest facilities capable of handling serious medical emergencies or criminal investigations were located hours away by ground transportation. These factors meant that the residents of Grandview would be largely dependent on their own resources during the critical first hours of any serious emergency. Elena's daily routine at the retirement had given her opportunities to observe the patterns of staff members, delivery personnel and visitors who had regular access to the facility. She had memorized the schedules of maintenance workers, food service vendors and medical equipment technicians who might provide cover for individuals with hostile intentions. Her analysis had also identified times of day when staffing levels were reduced and security procedures were most likely to be compromised by routine complacency. The night shift at Grandview consisted of a skeleton crew that included 2 licensed practical nurses, 1 certified nursing assistant, and a security guard who was primarily responsible for monitoring the main entrance and conducting periodic rounds of the building. Elena had noticed that the security guard often spent significant portions of his shift in the break room or main office, leaving large sections of the building unmonitored for extended periods. The facility's emergency response procedures relied heavily on electronic systems that could be compromised by individuals with basic technical knowledge. Elena's concern for the safety of the residents had grown stronger as she witnessed their daily struggles with the physical and cognitive limitations that made them dependent on others for their basic needs. Many were taking multiple medications that affected their alertness and mobility, while others suffered from conditions that impaired their ability to understand or respond to emergency situations. These vulnerabilities created moral obligations that Elena found impossible to ignore, despite her original intention to maintain emotional distance from her environment. The transformation of Elena's perspective on her role at Grandview had been gradual but undeniable. What had begun as a convenient cover for her transition to civilian life had evolved into a genuine commitment to protecting people who reminded her of why she had originally chosen a career in personal security. The residents represented everything that was worth defending in society, individuals who had contributed to their communities throughout their lives and deserved to live their final years with dignity and safety. Dr. Chen's observational skills and growing interest in Elena's background had created a situation that would require careful management to avoid compromising the security of both the facility and Elena's own position. The doctor's medical training made her potentially valuable as an but her curiosity about Elena's unusual competencies also represented a threat that could destroy the carefully constructed anonymity that had kept Elena safe for 8 months. Elena understood that her response to Dr. Chen's scrutiny would determine whether she could continue her role as protector of the Grandview residents, or whether she would be forced to abandon them to seek safety elsewhere. The decision would require her to balance her own survival instincts against her growing commitment to the elderly people who had come to depend on the security that her presence provided, even though they remained unaware of the true nature of her qualifications for keeping them safe. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Elena noticed a black sedan with tinted windows parked across from the retirement home's main entrance for the third consecutive day. The vehicle appeared during the early morning shift change and remained in position until late afternoon, its occupants invisible behind the darkened glass but clearly conducting surveillance on the facility's activities. Elena recognized the pattern from her previous career where such observations typically preceded more aggressive actions against protected targets. She had initially dismissed the sedan's presence as coincidence, perhaps family members of a prospective resident evaluating the facility before making placement decisions. But the vehicle's positioning provided optimal observation angles for monitoring staff movements and delivery schedules, while its license plates traced back to a rental company that specialized in short-term corporate leases rather than personal transportation. The combination of factors triggered alarm signals in Elena's trained consciousness that could not be ignored or rationalized away. Dr. Chen had also noticed the mysterious vehicle during her morning rounds, commenting to the head nurse that she found it concerning to see strangers watching the facility without identifying themselves or their purpose. The doctor's observation confirmed that Elena's concerns were not products of paranoia but legitimate security issues that warranted immediate attention and analysis. However, the appropriate response to such surveillance remained unclear without additional information about the observer's intentions and capabilities. Elena's assessment of the situation was complicated by her need to maintain her cover while gathering intelligence about potential threats to the residents under her unofficial protection. She could not openly investigate the surveillance team without revealing expertise that would be inconsistent with her employment as a laundry worker, yet ignoring the threat could result in harm to innocent people who had no means of protecting themselves against sophisticated acts. The retirement home's official security procedures were inadequate for dealing with organized surveillance or premeditated attacks by trained operatives.
The facility's emergency protocols focus primarily on medical crises and natural disasters, with minimal provisions for handling criminal activity beyond basic theft or vandalism. The single security guard employed by Grandview possessed no training in threat assessment or tactical response, while local law enforcement lacked the resources and expertise needed to investigate professional surveillance operations. Elena's dilemma intensified when she overheard a conversation between two members of the nursing staff discussing unusual phone calls that had been received by the facility's main office. The callers had claimed to be conducting research on behalf of a healthcare consulting firm, requesting detailed information about the facility's security procedures, staffing schedules, and resident demographics. The questions had been sophisticated enough to suggest legitimate business purposes, but persistent enough to make the administrative staff uncomfortable about providing the requested information. Professional surveillance teams often use such pretexts to gather intelligence about target facilities without alerting security personnel to their true intentions. The combination of physical observation and social engineering techniques suggested that whoever was interested in Grandview possessed significant resources and operational experience.
Elena understood that such capabilities were typically associated with organized criminal enterprises or intelligence services rather than opportunistic criminals looking for easy targets. The most troubling aspect of the developing situation was Elena's inability to determine whether she was the actual target of the surveillance or whether the observers were focused on other aspects of the retirement home's operations. Her previous career had created numerous enemies who would be interested in settling old scores if they discovered her current location, but the facility also housed residents who might possess information or assets that could attract criminal attention from other sources. Elena's analysis of the retirement home's resident population had identified several individuals whose backgrounds included military service, law enforcement careers, or business activities that might have created enemies or attracted unwanted attention. Mr. Raymond Foster in room 312 had served as a federal prosecutor for 30 years before retiring, handling cases involving organized crime and white-collar fraud that had resulted in numerous convictions and substantial prison sentences. Mrs. Helen Rodriguez in room 208 had worked as a financial analyst for several major corporations and possessed detailed knowledge of accounting practices that might be valuable to individuals seeking to exploit corporate vulnerabilities. The possibility that Elena's own presence at Grandview had somehow attracted hostile attention created additional complications for her assessment of the threat situation. Her carefully constructed cover identity was designed to withstand routine background checks, but determined investigators with access to sophisticated resources might be able to identify inconsistencies that could lead them to her true background. If her enemies had discovered her location, the surveillance might be preliminary to direct action against her that could endanger innocent residents caught in the crossfire. Elena's training had prepared her for situations where multiple threat vectors converge simultaneously, requiring rapid assessment and decisive action based on incomplete information. However, her previous assignments had typically involved protecting clients who were aware of the threats they faced and willing to accept extraordinary security measures to ensure their safety. The residents of Grandview were unaware that they might be in danger and would likely resist any attempts to implement protective measures that disrupted their daily routines. Dr. Chen's continued scrutiny of Elena's activities added another layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. The doctor's medical training made her an astute observer of human behavior, while her administrative authority gave her access to personnel records and the ability to conduct unofficial investigations into staff backgrounds. If Dr. Chen decided to probe deeper into Elena's history, she might uncover information that would compromise the carefully maintained cover that kept both Elena and the residents safe from retaliation. The strategic challenge facing Elena involved balancing the need to investigate potential threats against the risk of exposing her true capabilities to observers who might report such activities to hostile parties. Professional surveillance teams were trained to identify security personnel and assess their capabilities, information that could be used to plan countermeasures or escalate threat levels beyond what Elena could handle alone. Any overt security measures she implemented would signal that Grandview was under the protection of someone with advanced training and experience. Elena's options for gathering additional intelligence about the surveillance team were limited by the resources available to her in her current role. She could not access law enforcement databases or conduct electronic surveillance without revealing expertise that would compromise her cover, while physical reconnaissance of the observers would expose her to detection and possible confrontation. The most practical approach might involve using her position at the retirement home to gather information through indirect means that would not alert the surveillance team to her awareness of their presence. The laundry department's daily operations provided Elena with legitimate reasons to move throughout the facility and observe activities from multiple vantage points without attracting attention from staff or residents. Her routine deliveries of clean linens gave her access to every floor of the building, while her work schedule included early morning and late afternoon periods when surveillance teams typically conducted shift changes or briefing sessions that might reveal additional information about their objectives and capabilities. Elena began modifying her daily routines to include additional observations of the parking areas and surrounding neighborhoods where surveillance vehicles might be positioned. She used her breaks and meal periods to conduct casual reconnaissance from different floors of the building, noting vehicle descriptions, personnel changes, and communication patterns that might provide insights into the scope and sophistication of the operation being conducted against Grandview. Her analysis revealed that the surveillance was more extensive than initially apparent, involving at least 3 different vehicles that operated on rotating schedules throughout each 24-hour period. The operation appeared to be well-funded and professionally managed, with personnel who maintained strict communication discipline and followed protocols designed to minimize detection by amateur observers. Such capabilities suggested that the threat to Grandview was serious and immediate rather than speculative or distant. The retirement home's vulnerable population made it an attractive target for criminal enterprises that specialized in exploiting elderly victims through various schemes involving financial fraud, pharmaceutical theft, or extortion. Elena's experience had exposed her to intelligence reports describing organized groups that targeted assisted living facilities and retirement communities where residents possessed valuable assets but limited ability to defend themselves against sophisticated threats. Dr. Chen approached Elena during the afternoon shift change, her expression reflecting concern that extended beyond routine administrative matters. The doctor had clearly been observing Elena's modified behavior patterns and had drawn conclusions that warranted direct discussion rather than continued passive observation. Elena recognized that the conversation would be critical for determining whether Dr. Chen could become an ally in protecting the facility or whether her curiosity represented an additional threat that needed to be managed carefully. The doctor's opening question was direct and challenging, reflecting her medical training and diagnostic procedures that relied on gathering accurate information despite patient reluctance to provide complete or truthful responses. Dr. Chen asked Elena whether she had noticed anything unusual about recent activities around the retirement home, particularly regarding visitors or vehicles that seemed out of place in the normally quiet neighborhood surrounding the facility. Elena's response required careful calculation of how much information to reveal without compromising her cover or alerting Dr. Chen to the full extent of her capabilities. She acknowledged noticing the black sedan that had been parked across from the main entrance for several days, describing her observations in terms that would be natural for any alert employee who was concerned about the safety of the residents. Her tone conveyed appropriate worry about potential security issues without suggesting that she possessed advanced training in threat assessment or surveillance detection. Dr. Chen's follow-up questions revealed that she had been conducting her own informal investigation into the suspicious activities around Grandview, speaking with other staff members and reviewing security camera footage from the main entrance area. The doctor had identified patterns of behavior that concerned her from a safety perspective, including attempts by unknown individuals to gain unauthorized access to the building and phone calls requesting sensitive information about residents and facility operations. The conversation between Elena and Dr. Chen was interrupted by Janet Morrison, the laundry supervisor, who approached them with obvious agitation about a problem that had developed in the facility's main office. Morrison explained that the administrative staff had received another series of phone calls from individuals claiming to represent various legitimate organizations but asking detailed questions about security procedures, staffing schedules, and resident information that seemed inappropriate for the stated purposes of their inquiries. Morrison's description of the calls confirmed Elena's assessment that Grandview was being targeted by a sophisticated operation that employed multiple intelligence gathering techniques to develop comprehensive understanding of the facility's vulnerabilities. The combination of physical surveillance, social engineering, and attempts to gain unauthorized access suggested that the threat was immediate and serious rather than speculative or opportunistic. Elena listened to Morrison's account while maintaining the concerned but passive demeanor expected of a service worker who lacked authority or expertise to address security issues. However, her training allowed her to identify specific details in the description that indicated the callers possessed operational knowledge typical of professional intelligence operations or organized criminal enterprises. The questions being asked were designed to map the facility's defensive capabilities and identify optimal times for conducting unauthorized activities. Chen's response to Morrison's report demonstrated that she understood the potential implications of the suspicious activities and was prepared to take action to protect the residents under her medical supervision. The doctor announced her intention to contact local law enforcement agencies and to implement enhanced security measures that would restrict access to the building and improve monitoring of visitors and delivery personnel. Elena recognized that Dr. Chen's proposed actions, while well-intentioned, might actually increase the danger to Grandview's residents by alerting the surveillance that their activities had been detected and prompting them to accelerate whatever plans they were developing. Professional adversaries typically responded to increased security measures by escalating their own operational tempo rather than abandoning their objectives, particularly when significant resources had already been invested in intelligence gathering and preparation. The strategic challenge facing Elena involved finding ways to influence Dr. Chen's decision-making process without revealing her own expertise in security matters or compromising the cover identity that had kept her safe for 8 months. She needed to guide the doctor toward protective measures that would actually enhance the safety of the residents while avoiding actions that might provoke premature confrontation with his adversaries whose capabilities and intentions remained unknown. Elena's assessment of the local law enforcement resources available to Grandview indicated that official channels would be inadequate for dealing with sophisticated threats that required specialized knowledge and equipment to counter effectively. The Millbrook Police Department consisted of 12 officers who handled routine criminal matters and traffic enforcement, while the county sheriff's office possessed limited tactical capabilities for dealing with organized criminal activity or hostage situations that might develop if the surveillance escalated to direct action. The nearest federal law enforcement resources were located in the state capital, requiring several hours of coordination and travel time that would not be available if the threat to Grandview materialized suddenly. Elena understood that the residents would be largely dependent on whatever defensive measures could be implemented using the facility's own resources and personnel, supplemented by whatever unofficial protection she could provide without compromising her cover or revealing her true capabilities. Dr. Chen's medical background provided her with valuable skills for managing emergency situations, but her training focused primarily on treating injuries and coordinating evacuations rather than responding to deliberate attacks by hostile forces. Elena recognized that the doctor's natural leadership abilities and administrative authority made her potentially valuable as an ally, but only if she could be guided toward effective protective measures without learning too much about Elena's own background and capabilities. The conversation between Elena, Dr. Chen, and Morrison was overheard by several other staff members who gathered around to discuss their own observations of unusual activities around the retirement home. The nursing staff reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles in the parking areas during shift changes, while maintenance workers had noticed individuals conducting apparent surveys of the building's exterior features and surrounding grounds. Elena listened to these reports while conducting her own analysis of the intelligence being gathered about the developing threat situation. The scope and sophistication of the surveillance operation suggested that the adversaries possessed significant resources and operational experience, while the thoroughness of their preparation indicated that they were planning something more serious than opportunistic theft or vandalism. The retirement home's physical layout provided both advantages and disadvantages for defensive purposes depending on the nature of the threat that materialized. The building's substantial construction and limited access points made it relatively easy to control entry, and it also created potential for residents to become trapped if evacuation became necessary. The facility's isolation from neighboring structures provided privacy and security under normal circumstances, but also meant that assistance from external sources would be delayed if emergency situations developed. Elena's experience with facility security had taught her that the most effective defensive measures typically involve multiple layers of protection that address different types of threats through coordinated responses. Physical barriers, electronic surveillance, personnel training, and emergency procedures needed to work together as integrated systems rather than independent measures that might conflict with each other during crisis situations. The challenge of implementing such measures at Grandview was complicated by the need to maintain normal operations and avoid alarming residents who were not aware of potential threats to their safety. Elena understood that elderly populations were particularly vulnerable to the psychological stress associated with security emergencies, while their physical limitations made rapid evacuation or defensive acts extremely difficult to coordinate effectively. Dr. Chen's determination to address the suspicious activities through official channels reflected her medical training and following established protocols for reporting unusual circumstances to appropriate authorities.
However, Elena's operational experience had taught her that bureaucratic procedures were often inadequate for dealing with immediate threats that required rapid response and unconventional solutions. The developing situation at Grandview represented exactly the type of complex threat scenario that Elena's training had prepared her to handle, but her current cover identity prevented her from implementing the measures that would be most effective for protecting the residents. She faced the difficult choice between maintaining her anonymity and providing the protection that innocent people deserved but could not obtain through official channels. Elena's analysis of the threat indicators suggested that whatever the surveillance team was planning would likely occur within the next few days based on the intensity and duration of their intelligence gathering activities. Professional operations typically move from the surveillance phase to the execution phase when sufficient information had been gathered to ensure success while minimizing the risk of detection or interference by security forces. The retirement home's evening and overnight periods represented the most vulnerable times for potential attacks when staffing levels were reduced and emergency response capabilities were limited. Elena's assessment of the facility's defensive posture during these periods revealed multiple vulnerabilities that could be exploited by adversaries with detailed knowledge of the building's layout and security procedures. Dr.
Chen's growing awareness of the security concerns affecting Grandview created both opportunities and risks for Elena's unofficial protective mission. The doctor's medical authority and administrative position made her potentially valuable for coordinating defensive measures and managing emergency situations, but her curiosity about Elena's background threatened to compromise the cover identity that had kept both of them safe from retaliation by hostile parties. Elena realized that the next 24 hours would be critical for determining whether she could continue her role as protector of the Grandview residents or whether the developing threat situation would force her to choose between her own safety and her commitment to innocent people who had come to depend on her presence, even though they remained unaware of the true nature of the protection she provided. At 11:37 that night, Elena heard the soft click of the service entrance lock being manipulated by someone with professional lock-picking skills. She had positioned herself in the basement laundry room after noticing that the overnight security guard had fallen asleep in the main office, leaving the building essentially unmonitored during the most vulnerable hours of the night shift. The sound was barely audible above the hum of the industrial equipment, but her trained hearing recognized it immediately as the signature of a skilled operative gaining unauthorized access to the facility. Elena moved silently through the basement corridors, using her intimate knowledge of the building's layout to position herself where she could observe the intruders without being detected. 3 figures dressed in dark clothing entered through the service door, their movements coordinated and purposeful in a way that confirmed her assessment of their professional capabilities. They carried compact equipment bags and wore tactical gear that suggested military or law enforcement training, while their communication discipline indicated extensive experience in covert operations. The lead intruder produced a handheld device that Elena recognized as a signal detector, designed to locate and disable electronic surveillance systems before they could transmit alerts to monitoring stations. The team's possession of such sophisticated equipment confirmed that they were not ordinary criminals but professionals conducting a high-value operation that justified significant investment in specialized tools and planning. Elena watched as the intruders split into 2 groups, with one pair heading toward the main elevator while the third individual remained near the service entrance to maintain communications and provide security for their escape route. Their tactical deployment suggested that they possessed detailed intelligence about the building's layout and had developed a specific plan for reaching their objective while avoiding detection by staff members or security systems. The target of their operation became clear when Elena overheard radio communications indicating that they were seeking access to the 3rd floor, where the facility housed residents with the highest levels of medical care and supervision. This area included rooms occupied by individuals whose backgrounds might attract criminal attention, including former government officials, retired law enforcement officers, and business executives who possessed valuable information or assets that could be exploited by sophisticated adversaries. Elena faced a critical decision that would determine whether she maintained her cover or revealed her true capabilities to protect innocent people who had no means of defending themselves against professional adversaries. Her training and experience provided her with the skills necessary to neutralize the intruders, but taking such action would expose her identity and likely force her to abandon the life she had built in Millbrook while potentially endangering other residents caught in the crossfire. The moral calculation was complicated by her growing attachment to the elderly residents who had become more than mere cover for her transition to civilian life. These individuals represented everything that was worth protecting in society, and their vulnerability to exploitation by criminals created obligations that Elena found impossible to ignore despite the personal risks involved in taking action against trained adversaries. Elena moved through the building using service corridors and maintenance passages that allowed her to track the intruders' progress without exposing herself to detection. Her years of experience in protective operations had taught her to think like both predator and prey, anticipating the movements of hostile forces while identifying opportunities to neutralize threats before they could harm innocent people. The intruders demonstrated excellent tactical discipline as they advanced through the building, using hand signals and maintaining radio silence except for essential communications that were transmitted in coded language. Their professionalism confirmed Elena's assessment that they were dealing with a serious threat that would require corresponding expertise to counter effectively. Elena's analysis of the tactical situation revealed several advantages that she could exploit despite being outnumbered by adversaries with superior equipment and preparation time. Her intimate knowledge of the building's layout provided opportunities for ambush and misdirection that the intruders could not anticipate, while her position as a presumed civilian would allow her to approach them without triggering immediate defensive responses. The facility's construction included several choke points where Elena could control the intruders' movement and limit their tactical options if confrontation became necessary. The stairwells, elevator shafts, and corridor intersections created natural ambush sites where superior numbers and equipment could be neutralized through proper positioning and timing. Elena retrieved emergency supplies from a concealed cache she had established in the basement storage area, including items that could serve as improvised weapons and communication equipment that would allow her to coordinate with law enforcement if the situation escalated beyond what she could handle alone. Her preparations reflected years of experience in situations where official support was unavailable and individual initiative was the only protection available for innocent people caught in dangerous circumstances. The first intruder reached the third floor and began moving toward the rooms occupied by high-value residents, confirming Elena's assessment of their objectives while creating an immediate threat that demanded intervention. Elena understood that waiting for the adversaries to complete their mission before taking action would likely result in harm to residents who trusted the facility to provide adequate security for their protection. Elena ascended to the third floor using a service stairwell that provided access to the corridor system without passing through areas covered by the building's limited surveillance cameras. Her movement was silent and purposeful, reflecting thousands of hours of training in stealth techniques that had kept her alive through operations in hostile environments around the world. The layout of the third floor created tactical opportunities that Elena could exploit to isolate and neutralize individual intruders before they could coordinate defensive responses or call for external support. The corridor design included several blind corners and alcoves where she could position herself to observe enemy movements while remaining undetected until the optimal moment for intervention. Elena's first contact with the intruders occurred when she encountered the individual who had been assigned to maintain security at the service entrance. The operative was monitoring radio communications while conducting periodic surveillance of the parking areas through windows that provided clear observation of potential law enforcement response. His position made him vulnerable to approach from behind, but also meant that neutralizing him would alert his colleagues to the presence of unexpected resistance. Elena moved within striking distance of the sentry using techniques developed through years of close-quarters combat training that emphasized speed and silence over conventional martial arts approaches. Her attack was calculated to incapacitate the target without creating noise that might alert other members of the team or disturb sleeping residents whose safety depended on avoiding confrontation in populated areas of the building. The sentry collapsed without making a sound, his communication equipment secured by Elena before he could transmit warnings to his colleagues operating elsewhere in the building. Elena's possession of their radio frequency allowed her to monitor the intruders' communications while potentially confusing their coordination if deception became necessary to protect residents or facilitate law enforcement response. Elena dragged the unconscious operative into a storage closet where he would remain hidden if discovered by staff members conducting routine checks while also preventing him from regaining consciousness and resuming his role in the operation. Her treatment of the prisoner reflected professional standards that emphasized neutralization of threats while avoiding unnecessary violence that might escalate the confrontation beyond manageable levels. The remaining two intruders had reached their target area on the third floor and were conducting systematic searches of resident rooms using techniques that suggested they were seeking specific individuals rather than conducting random theft or vandalism. Elena monitored their radio communications while planning her approach to neutralize them before they could complete their mission or harm elderly residents who were physically unable to defend themselves. Elena's tactical assessment revealed that the intruders possessed detailed intelligence about the facility's resident population, including information about room assignments and personal backgrounds that would not be available through casual observation or public records. Their operation had clearly been planned with access to confidential data that suggested either inside assistance or sophisticated intelligence gathering capabilities that extended beyond what most criminal organizations could accomplish. The target of their search appeared to be Mr. Raymond Foster, the retired federal prosecutor whose career had involved high-profile cases against organized crime figures and corrupt government officials. Foster's room was located at the end of a corridor that provided limited escape routes for the intruders if they were discovered, creating tactical opportunities that Elena could exploit to trap them in a confined space where their superior numbers would be less advantageous. Elena positioned herself in an alcove that provided observation of Foster's room while remaining concealed from the intruders who were conducting their search with professional thoroughness. Their techniques suggested that they were seeking either information or physical evidence rather than planning to harm Foster directly, but their willingness to conduct unauthorized entry indicated that they were prepared to use violence if necessary to accomplish their objectives. Foster himself was unaware of the danger he faced, sleeping peacefully in his bed while trained operatives searched through his personal belongings for materials that might be valuable to criminal organizations or hostile intelligence services. His vulnerability emphasized the moral imperative that drove Elena to risk her own safety rather than allowing innocent people to be victimized by adversaries who possessed overwhelming advantages in training and equipment. Elena's approach to the intruders required careful timing to ensure that she could neutralize both targets before either could react defensively or alert external support to the developing situation. Her years of experience in similar operations had taught her that success in such encounters depended on precise execution rather than superior firepower or overwhelming force. The first intruder fell victim to Elena's attack when he emerged from Foster's bathroom after conducting a search for hidden documents or valuable items. Elena's strike was delivered with surgical precision to nerve centers that would incapacitate him without causing permanent injury, reflecting her professional training in neutralization techniques that emphasized effectiveness over brutality. The second intruder reacted to his colleague's collapse with tactical discipline that confirmed Elena's assessment of their professional capabilities, immediately seeking cover while attempting to establish radio external support. His response forced Elena to modify her approach from stealth to direct confrontation, creating risks for both herself and the sleeping residents who might be endangered if the situation escalated to armed conflict. Elena's engagement with the second intruder demonstrated the effectiveness of her training against adversaries who possessed similar backgrounds but lacked her intimate knowledge of the tactical environment. The confined space of the corridor limited his ability to maneuver effectively, while Elena's familiarity with the building's layout allowed her to anticipate his movements and counter his defensive measures. The confrontation ended when Elena successfully incapacitated the second intruder using techniques that neutralized his threat capability while avoiding the use of lethal force that might have created complications with law enforcement agencies investigating the incident. Her restraint reflected professional standards that emphasized minimum necessary force while ensuring that threats to innocent people were eliminated completely. Elena secured both unconscious operatives in a storage room where they would remain until law enforcement could take custody of them, while also collecting their equipment and communication devices for analysis by appropriate authorities. Her handling of the prisoners and evidence demonstrated the same attention to legal procedures that had characterized her previous career in legitimate security operations. The immediate threat to Grandview's residents had been neutralized, but Elena understood that the operation she had disrupted was likely part of a larger criminal enterprise that would attempt alternative approaches to accomplishing their objectives. The professionalism and resources demonstrated by the intruders suggested that powerful interests were involved in whatever scheme had targeted the retirement home and its vulnerable population. Elena's successful defense of the facility had been accomplished without revealing her true identity to staff members or residents, but the incident would inevitably attract law enforcement attention that might compromise her carefully maintained cover. She faced difficult decisions about how much information to provide to investigating officers while protecting both her own anonymity and the safety of people who had come to depend on her unofficial protection. Dr. Chen discovered Elena in the corridor outside Foster's room when she responded to reports of unusual sounds that had disturbed several residents on the third floor. The doctor's expression reflected confusion about Elena's presence in an area where laundry workers would not normally be found during overnight hours, creating the need for explanations that would not compromise Elena's cover while accounting for her involvement in preventing the criminal operation. Elena's response to Dr. Chen's questions required careful balance between providing sufficient information to satisfy the doctor's concerns while avoiding details that would reveal her true capabilities or background. She explained her presence as a response to sounds that had concerned her during routine security checks that she conducted voluntarily to supplement the facility's inadequate overnight supervision. The arrival of local law enforcement officers created additional complications for Elena's efforts to maintain her cover while ensuring that appropriate action was taken against the captured intruders. The Millbrook Police Department's limited experience with sophisticated criminal operations meant that the investigation would likely be transferred to state or federal agencies with greater resources and expertise in dealing with organized crime activities. Elena's cooperation with the investigating officers was carefully calibrated to provide useful information about the incident while avoiding statements that might lead to detailed background checks or extended questioning about her qualifications for neutralizing trained adversaries. Her account emphasized her role. Detective Lisa Warren arrived at Grandview Retirement 40 minutes after the local officers had secured the scene. Her expertise training and experience. Her role had single-handedly neutralized 3 professional intruders. Warren specialized in organized crime investigations for the state police and possessed enough experience with criminal operations to recognize when official accounts didn't align with physical evidence or logical explanations. The detective's first interview was with Dr. Chen, whose medical training made her an reliable witness despite her obvious confusion about the night's events. Chen described discovering Elena in the third-floor court after residents reported hearing unusual sounds but acknowledged that the laundry workers' explanation for being in that given the timing and circumstances of the incident.
Warren's examination of the captured intruders revealed individuals with extensive criminal records and apparent connections to a trafficking organization that specialized in targeting elderly victims for financial exploitation and identity theft. Their equipment included sophisticated electronic devices for bypassing security systems and accessing computer networks, while their tactical gear suggested military or law enforcement backgrounds that had been corrupted for criminal purposes. The detective's analysis of the crime scene produced evidence that troubled her professional understanding of how such confrontations typically unfolded. The unconscious intruders showed signs of precise trauma to nerve centers and pressure points that would require expert knowledge of human anatomy and extensive training in hand-to-hand combat techniques. The positioning of their bodies and the condition of their equipment suggested that they had been neutralized by someone with professional expertise rather than a frightened civilian acting in self-defense. Elena's interview with Detective Warren required careful navigation between providing sufficient cooperation to satisfy legal requirements while avoiding statements that might prompt deeper investigation into her background or qualifications. She maintained her cover identity as a concerned employee who had acted instinctively to protect vulnerable residents, emphasizing her emotional attachment to the elderly people under her care rather than any technical expertise that might have enabled her tactical success. Warren's questioning focused on Elena's martial arts training and self-defense experience, seeking explanations for her ability to overcome adversaries with apparent military backgrounds and superior equipment. Elena acknowledged taking basic self-defense classes during her youth but attributed her success primarily to luck and desperation rather than systematic training or professional experience. The detective's skepticism was evident in her follow-up questions about Elena's employment history and personal background, but the carefully constructed documentation supporting her cover identity withstood routine verification procedures. Warren's investigation was also limited by time constraints and jurisdictional boundaries that prevented her from conducting the type of comprehensive background check that might have revealed inconsistencies in Elena's official records. Dr. Chen's conversation with Elena following the police interviews reflected the doctor's growing understanding that her employee possessed capabilities that extended far beyond those suggested by her official qualifications or employment history. Chen's medical training had taught her to recognize signs of advanced physical conditioning and combat experience, while her observation of Elena's behavior during the crisis had revealed composure and tactical awareness that seemed inconsistent with civilian background. The doctor's approach to Elena was direct but respectful, acknowledging that everyone possessed private histories that they might prefer not to discuss while expressing gratitude for actions that had protected residents under her medical supervision. Chen's questions were framed as professional curiosity rather than official investigation, creating opportunities for Elena to provide selected information without compromising her cover identity or revealing sensitive details about her previous career. Elena's response to Dr. Chen's inquiries was carefully calibrated to satisfy the doctor's legitimate concerns while maintaining the boundaries necessary to protect both of their safety. She acknowledged possessing skills that exceeded those typically associated with laundry workers but attributed them to personal experiences that she preferred not to discuss in detail. Her tone conveyed respect for Chen's intelligence while requesting understanding about her need for privacy regarding certain aspects of her background. The conversation between Elena and Dr. Chen was interrupted by the arrival of FBI agent Michael Torres, whose jurisdiction included cases involving organized crime activities that crossed state boundaries or targeted federal witnesses and law enforcement personnel.
Torres had been dispatched to investigate the Grandview incident after initial analysis revealed that the captured intruders possessed equipment and training that suggested connections to a criminal network under federal investigation. Agent Torres's interview with Elena was more sophisticated than the local police questioning, reflecting his experience with witnesses who possessed classified backgrounds or specialized training that couldn't be discussed openly. His approach was designed to gather useful intelligence about the criminal operation while respecting potential security concerns that might prevent complete disclosure of relevant information. Elena recognized Torres's professional competence and adapted her responses accordingly, providing detailed information about the intruder's equipment and tactical procedures while maintaining her cover identity as a civilian employee. Her cooperation was extensive enough to satisfy the agent's investigative requirements while avoiding statements that might compromise her carefully constructed background or reveal her true qualifications. Torres's analysis of Elena's account identified several details that suggested she possessed advanced training in threat assessment and tactical operations, but his experience with government personnel operating undercover prevented him from pursuing lines of inquiry that might compromise legitimate security operations. The agent's report would classify Elena as a cooperative witness with possible law enforcement or military background rather than a subject requiring further investigation. The federal investigation into the criminal organization that had targeted Grandview revealed a sophisticated network specializing in exploiting elderly victims through various schemes involving financial fraud, identity theft, and blackmail. The captured intruders provided intelligence about other planned operations against retirement facilities and assisted living communities throughout the region, leading to arrests that disrupted a criminal enterprise responsible for millions of dollars in losses. Elena's role in preventing the Grandview operation earned recognition from law enforcement agencies and facility administrators, but she carefully deflected attempts to publicize her actions or provide media interviews that might compromise her anonymity. Her preference for remaining in the background was attributed to personal modesty rather than security concerns, allowing her to maintain her cover while accepting appropriate acknowledgement for her heroic actions. Dr. Chen's recommendation that Elena receive promotion and additional responsibilities within the Grandview organization reflected both gratitude for her protective actions and recognition of capabilities that seemed underutilized in her current position. The doctor's proposal included enhanced security responsibilities that would formalize Elena's unofficial role as protector of the facility's vulnerable residents while providing salary increases and benefits commensurate with her demonstrated value. Elena's acceptance of expanded responsibilities at Grandview represented a significant evolution in her relationship with the retirement home and its residents. What had begun as convenient cover for her transition to civilian life had become a genuine commitment to serving people who had earned the right to live their final years with dignity and security. Her willingness to risk her carefully constructed anonymity demonstrated that her emotional attachment to the residents had overcome her instinct for self-preservation. The implementation of enhanced security measures at Grandview was coordinated between Elena and Dr. Chen, combining Elena's tactical expertise with the doctor's administrative authority to create comprehensive protection that addressed multiple threat scenarios. The improvements included upgraded surveillance systems, revised emergency procedures, and staff training programs that prepared employees to recognize and respond to suspicious activities that might endanger residents. Elena's training responsibilities with the Grandview staff required her to share selected aspects of her expertise while maintaining her cover identity as someone with basic security knowledge rather than professional credentials. Her instruction focused on practical awareness techniques and emergency response procedures that would enhance the facility's defensive capabilities without revealing the full extent of her own training and experience. Raymond Foster's gratitude to Elena for protecting him from the criminal organization was expressed through private conversations that reflected his understanding of the personal risks she had accepted to ensure his safety. Foster's background as a federal prosecutor had given him insight into the challenges faced by individuals who chose to confront organized crime, and his appreciation for Elena's actions went beyond simple thanks to include genuine respect for her courage and competence. The other residents of Grandview gradually became aware that Elena had played a crucial role in protecting them from danger, though the specific details of her actions were not widely discussed to avoid alarming elderly people who might be disturbed by knowledge of their vulnerability to criminal exploitation. Their expressions of gratitude were heartfelt but restrained, reflecting both appreciation for her protection and respect for her apparent preference for privacy about her background. Elena's integration into the Grandview community as both employee and protector created a sense of security that extended beyond the specific incident she had prevented. Her presence provided reassurance to residents who understood that they were safer because someone with genuine concern for their welfare was watching over them, even if they didn't fully understand the nature of her qualifications for providing such protection. Dr. Chen's professional relationship with Elena evolved into genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to the welfare of Grandview's residents. The doctor's medical expertise complemented Elena's security capabilities, creating an informal partnership that enhanced the facility's ability to address both routine challenges and emergency situations that might threaten the safety of vulnerable elderly people. Elena's apartment in Millbrook was modified to accommodate her expanded role at Grandview, with improvements that reflected both her increased income and her commitment to remaining in the community long-term. The changes were subtle but significant, representing her psychological transition from temporary refugee to permanent resident who had found purpose and belonging in protecting people who needed her unique capabilities. The criminal investigation that had begun with the Grandview incident continued for several months, with Elena providing ongoing consultation to law enforcement agencies investigating the broader network of organizations that targeted elderly victims. Her cooperation was conducted through secure channels that protected her identity while contributing valuable intelligence to operations that prevented similar crimes against other vulnerable populations. Elena's success in balancing her desire for anonymity with her commitment to justice reflected skills developed through years of operating in complex environments where competing loyalties and conflicting objectives required careful navigation. Her ability to support law enforcement efforts without compromising her own security demonstrated the same strategic thinking that had kept her alive through dangerous assignments around the world. The transformation of Elena's role at Grandview from cover identity to genuine vocation was completed when she received formal recognition from the State Healthcare Department for her contributions to resident safety and facility security. The award ceremony was conducted privately to respect her preference for avoiding publicity, but the recognition provided official validation of her value to the retirement community and the broader healthcare system. Dr. Chen's speech at the recognition ceremony emphasized Elena's dedication to protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, describing her as an example of how individual courage and competence could make decisive differences in the lives of others. The doctor's words reflected her understanding that Elena's actions had been motivated by genuine compassion rather than professional obligation or personal ambition. Elena's response to the recognition was characteristically modest, emphasizing the collaborative nature of the security improvements at Grandview and crediting Dr. Chen's leadership for creating an environment where residents could live safely and comfortably. Her comments reflected both gratitude for the opportunity to serve the community and commitment to continuing her protective role for as long as she was needed. The residents of Grandview organized their own informal celebration of Elena's contributions, presenting her with a handmade quilt that incorporated fabric from clothing donated by each resident. The gift represented their collective appreciation for her protection and their acceptance of her as a permanent member of their extended family. Despite the mysteries that surrounded her background and qualifications, Elena's emotional response to the residents' gift reflected the profound changes that her time at Grandview had created in her understanding of purpose and belonging. The elderly people who had initially represented convenient cover for her transition to civilian life had become family whose welfare mattered more to her than her own safety or anonymity. 6 months after the incident that had revealed her true capabilities, Elena stood in the Grandview laundry room folding towels with the same precise movements that had originally attracted Dr. Chen's attention. But now those movements represented something different than hidden training or concealed identity. They represented the daily commitment of someone who had found peace through service to others, using skills developed for war to create safety for people who deserve protection in their most vulnerable years. The black sedan with tinted windows was gone from the parking lot, replaced by the normal flow of family visitors, delivery trucks, and staff vehicles that characterized the peaceful operation of a well-managed retirement facility. The surveillance equipment and criminal networks that had threatened Grandview had been dismantled through law enforcement actions that Elena had supported from the shadows, ensuring that other facilities would be safer because of the intelligence gathered during the investigation. Elena's journey from professional warrior to community protector was complete, but her story continued each day as she maintained vigilance over people who trusted her to keep them safe. Her hands still moved with lethal precision when folding laundry, but now that precision served love rather than duty, compassion rather than contract, and hope rather than simply survival. The transformation was visible to anyone who understood what to look for, but it remained invisible to those who saw only a dedicated employee going about her daily routine with unusual attention to detail. Elena had learned that sometimes the greatest victories were achieved not through dramatic actions witnessed by the world, but through quiet dedication that protected the innocent while asking nothing in return except the satisfaction of knowing that good people could sleep safely because someone was watching over them. Dr. Chen often observed Elena at work no longer with suspicion about her background but with admiration for her choice to use extraordinary abilities in service of ordinary people who needed protection. The doctor understood that Grandview had been blessed with a guardian whose qualifications far exceeded what the facility could have afforded to hire officially, but whose personal commitment made such calculations irrelevant. Elena's story had become legend among the staff and residents of Grandview, though the details remained appropriately vague to protect both her privacy and their peace of mind. What mattered was not the specifics of her background but the reality of her presence, the knowledge that someone with genuine competence and unlimited dedication was ensuring their safety every day. The laundry room continued to hum with the sound of industrial equipment, but now it also hummed with the quiet satisfaction of purpose fulfilled and lives well protected. Elena had found her place in the world not as a weapon pointed at enemies but as a shield raised to protect the vulnerable, and that made all the difference for everyone whose lives she touched. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.